Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of the Montgomery County Council, our state legislation session. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have an hour to get through a number of things because there are committee sessions after this, and so I will be watching the clock. Our goal today is to get a update on the FY26 budget in Annapolis. Also, to take up, our goal is to hopefully take up the first 5 bills on the local bills. We prioritize those because those are ones that folks have expressed interest on, and also members of our delegation have requested that we take them up. So the goal is to get through those 5 if we can. And then if we have time, in your packet is also a highlight of state bills that we will be taking up at a future session. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to the team.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to spend a very short period of time on the state budget, the capital budget and the operating budget, what they're doing. And I chose the good story first, which is the capital budget. Which is not as impacted, certainly, as the operating budget. And if you just, attachment 1 has just a few sheets that I think provide a little bit of the story for Montgomery County. The capital projects, the priorities list that we submitted, we did get some of those projects. I think the biggest one that was not already pre-authorized for this year is Glen Echo. And so we're pleased on that, but we have some work to do to round out a little bit more of what's on our capital list. The General Assembly, the governor's budget does include a fair amount of money for the General Assembly to spend on the capital budget, about $50 million. So we'll work with the delegation to see if we can make some progress on some of these, but we're grateful for what's in the capital budget so far. The next part of the story is not so good. I think that it's no secret about the predicament the state finds itself in with pretty unprecedented situation with a $26 billion budget and a $3 billion of sorts of cash problem on that budget. So when something like that happens, it's the counties are usually part of the story, and that is the case here. The one chart that just shows kind of year-to-year state aid shows some growth, and that would be natural. But what that chart does not entirely reflect is kind of what's behind those numbers and the changes that occurred. And those changes, in addition to a shifting of the responsibility that's now shared 50-50 for the State Department of Assessments and Taxation with county governments to fund their operations, that would shift from a 50-50 split to a 90-10 split. This is something we're really familiar with. That I've been to this well a number of times, but I don't know if this year would be the year where it would be taken serious or not. But otherwise, the shift in total to Montgomery County of things that either through having to assume costs or state aid reductions that we would have outside of this situation not had to bear is about $42 million. And those charts there's a little bit more detail. Don't get too confused. I'm just providing you like what the state aid chart really looks like, and then one that's also called, cost shifts, of which some of that is actually embedded in state aid. But suffice it to say that that number is roughly about $42 million as it stands today. As the governor has submitted his budget, this is a long process. This is just the beginning of a negotiation that will occur with the legislature that will be paying very close attention to. I think that you all are aware of the tax package that the governor has set forth. That $3 billion is split roughly $1 billion in new revenues and about $2 billion in transfers from funds and cost shifts and reductions in budgets. So there will be probably a lot more written about the tax plan every day. There's some more information that comes out about that. So glad to talk more about it at a later meeting or just let you read it in the newspaper. And that's that portion of this agenda, unless other people have questions about it.
Any questions on the state budget? No, not seeing any. So why don't we go to our local bills? As I stated before, the first 3 bills we pulled up because those are ones that we wanted to prioritize trying to get through today. And We'll start back with the Montgomery County Board of Education compensation, and folks should have received an addendum to that, and that is up on the website as well.
Thank
This
you.
is the Kathleen show.
Yes.
Here we go.
Sorry, everyone. Bear with me. Thank you, Madam President. Yes, MC 725, the council had a vigorous discussion when we last spoke to you on January 13th and had a number of questions. I've highlighted those questions at the beginning of the addendum under this bill. But just very quickly, you were looking for more comparison information of the compensation amounts that are in the current law versus the bill versus the commission, fiscal impacts of the bill and commission recommendations, comparative data from other counties, potential amendment to make the bill consistent with the commission's recommendations regarding the SMOB, potentially language to expressly state that it's a full-time job. And then you also discussed an issue relating to staffing and noted that the bill does not address staffing. So there's discussion about that. So in the addendum, I've walked through current law and a bill summary again, but I don't want to spend a lot of time there. I want to get to your questions. But but just as a refresher, I think I will move to page 3 of the addendum and work off of a chart that's there. And I would say that as I walk through it, in reading it this morning, I realized there are a couple things that could have been more clear, and I'll kind of clarify that here. So I put a little table there to try to just put side by side what the different compensation amounts are, so you can see the differences between current law, the first year of phase-in for the bill, second year phase-in for the bill, and the commission. The thing that I realized lacks clarity here is that in the narrative, I mentioned to you that the commission's range for its publicly elected officials was 110,000 to 130, and I noted that the chart was just going to reflect the maximum. But I think to really understand the differences, when you look at the commission's column there, really for the publicly elected members, it's a range of 110,000 to 130,000, which the commission calls the base. When you look at the president's salary, the commission, it's a range of 123,000 to 143,000. And when you look at the SMOB, the commission recommended either a scholarship or a stipend equal to 30 to 35% of the base salary. So what that's going to be depends on whether you choose 30 or 35% and what you choose as the base salary. But just so you know, I did the calculations of the range and the percentages, and just basically under the commission, the range for the SMOB, depending on which factor you pick for 30, 35 or base, the range there is going to be 33,000 to 45,500, depending on what the base salary is and depending on whether you're making the scholarship stipend 30 or 35%. So that range coming out of the commission would be 33,000 to 45,500 for the SMOB. I do want to note that the County Executive Special Assistant Dale Tibbetts was the staff to the commission, and I went back and forth with Dale over the weekend. It was very helpful, and he's here today in case there's questions relating to the actual commission. In terms of fiscal impacts, I found it very difficult in my head to put together really what would be a comprehensive fiscal note and in terms of each fiscal year through essentially FY28, FY29, because the actual fiscal impact is going to depend on the staggered terms of our board members when their new terms come up. And so what I did on page 4 is give you a simple order of magnitude. I mean, if you just look at the bill when it's fully phased in, what's in the commission, and what's in current law, the chart that I have there on page 4 is intended to be an order of magnitude. You see that for the publicly elected members under current law, that's reflecting, the 150,000 is reflecting 6 members at 25,000. The compensation under the bill, MC25, is reflecting the final salary amount, $740,000, $780,000 for the commission, and you can see it there. And what I've just added it up is, so what are the costs of current law of the bill and the commission when fully phased in, and you can see it there. I would say that the SMOB's $45,500 and the commission's numbers, I had to pick something, and I picked the maximum range. I picked the base salary of $130,000 and went from there. I should tell you while I'm here that one of the things Dale and I started looking at was, well, if we did want to do a fine-tuned analysis, this is what we'd have to do, just so you know. And this is something that I think would have to be addressed in the bill, regardless of the fiscal issue. It have to be addressed from a policy matter. Because what we were looking at was that because of the staggered terms, the 4-year staggered terms for the public members elected, and the 1-year term for the SMOB, if the bill doesn't address things, the way it's set up is the 4 members that were elected in 2022, this coming December, and the 3 members elected in 2024 would have the same salary under current law. It doesn't change. So they have $25,000. On the other hand, that's the first year, the student that starts next year, that's the first year of the student phase-in. So while the elected members are making $25,000, unless the bill is changed, the student member next year would make a $24,800 scholarship and have a $6,200 stipend. And it goes like that with strange things happening. When you get to December 1, 2026, you have the 4 members who were elected in 2022 making $124,000. The 3 members who were elected in 2024 still only making $25,000, and you have the SMOB making a scholarship of $99,200 and a stipend of $24,800, and then and you sort of kind of just go on from that, where as far as we can tell, and Dale, you can correct me, the way we got to it was it's not all phased in until December 1, 2028, when the members that are sitting today, that were elected in 2024, come up for re-election. So just there's discrepancies that I think from a policy matter folks would be concerned about. We're stuck with that without a constitutional amendment, though, because the Constitution says that you can't change the salary of officials such as the Board of Ed for the term that they're sitting in before the effective date of the bill. So that's the trick there. I will say that when we talked to the county executive this morning, he actually asked us to look into the possibility of all members of the Board of Education resigning and being reappointed in terms of making this happen quicker. I just thought it was a legal matter. And it's interesting because when you do, the bill references the Constitution, and it does say this limitation does not apply to an individual appointed or elected after the effective date of the bill. So the county attorney's office is looking into that, just in terms of if we really want to help folks quicker, how could that happen?
Great. So let's put a pin in that one, and we'll see. But I think not from looking at my colleagues and hearing from them on this point, I think it's an important one to raise with the leads on this bill and how they plan to address that. I don't think as a body we're going to address those discrepancies and those issues, but maybe that as we talk about some of the other things that we may take up, I think this piece on how this is phased in is a good one to raise with the leads on this.
Okay,
So
sounds good.
Why don't we move to what
And
we can kind of take a position on?
Okay, so the next, I think I moved quickly. You had asked for comparative information on other jurisdictions, and the commission had done some comparative work on largest school districts in the United States, and that's on pages 113 to 114 of your packet. They also looked at the largest school systems in Maryland. That's on pages 115 to 116 of your packet. And they also have as an attachment on page 117 of the attachment 1, salaries of select Montgomery County officials. So you have that data there. In terms of a potential amendment relating to full-time job, the question here is what language would one use to reflect that? So with Dale's help, we just started looking at the charter and county law, and one model we see is that in the charter for the county executive, he's required to devote full time to the duties of the office and shall not participate in any private occupation for compensation. So you have that model. In contrast, for the county council in the charter, you have language that says council members shall be considered a full-time position for the purpose of determining compensation, and does not include any language about secondary employment or anything else. Also noted that for the Montgomery County Planning Board full-time position, which I believe is the chair, there is language in state law that indicates that the council may authorize appropriate supplementary salary for the commissioner designated to serve in full-time basis, but there's no, in statute, I didn't see anything related to what full-time means. So the question would be kind of what model do you want? I know we talked to the county executive this morning, and he is requesting an amendment after the county executive model, such that there would be a prohibition on any other compensation from secondary employment. In terms of the potential amendment regarding inconsistencies between the bill, Councilmember Friedson and the commission, and I know Vice President Drondo and others, we had a discussion about that. So in looking at it more closely this weekend, I actually saw 3 differences. So there's a difference in the total compensation. There's a difference in whether the SMOB has discretion to choose stipend or scholarship. And there actually is a difference in terms of whether the stipend is one time or provided during the student member's term of office. I'm not quite clear on the meaning of that language, but it suggested to me it might be referencing regular increments throughout the term. So on page 5 of the memo, again, I'm sharing what the SMOB compensation would be under the bill, what it is under the commission, and if you wanted amendments, it's just a matter of you sharing your decisions about total amount of compensation that you think is appropriate, extent to which the SMOB has discretion to choose some or all the compensation as a scholarship or stipend, whether any stipend should be one-time payment or paid incrementally over the SMOB's term in office, and then whether any new compensation would be phased in, as the bill does over 2 years. In terms of staff complement, the only thing we can really share again is that state law does not speak to staff complement at all. It speaks to compensation. The bill doesn't speak to staffing at all. And so I think my understanding is that it envisions that the counties make decisions along with their boards of education about the staffing for boards. But, you know, should there be a desire for an amendment, if you think this is an appropriate vehicle, we could work on that. I think that's it. I hope I've addressed questions and issues that were discussed when we last met.
Great, thank you. So I think there are 2 big buckets that we want to take up. One is on compensation, and that has a number of different pieces to it. And then the other is the language on the amendment regarding full-time and whether or not we agree with the county executive's recommendation. Council Vice President Joando, I'll let you start us off.
Oh, joy. Thank you very much for digging into all the details. I know this is very complicated. I'll start with the compensation. I think the compensation in the bill is fine. I think that I agree with that. Along with not only for the adult members, but also for the student member. You pointed out the 3 differences. I want to lift up something Councilmember Albornoz said after I spoke last time that for the SMOB, they really are full-time because they're getting asked stuff all day, every day in school by their students, and they kind of are living the job. It's not a huge fiscal impact. I like the breakdown of giving them the full amount in a combination of stipend and scholarship. I think the way the bill, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the bill lays it out is that the 99,000. Well, could you just lay it out just repeat how the bill would break
Sure.
it down?
Sure. So, again, 2 years phase in. So,
Right, so it wouldn't be next year, the year after.
so the first year next year, which is the school year 2025, 2026, you'd have the SMOB receiving a $24,800 scholarship, and you'd have them receiving a $6,200 stipend. The following year, you'd have them making, in combination, the same as a regular publicly elected.
Right.
And the combination would be 99,200 scholarship
And then 24,800.
and 24,800 stipend.
Got it. So I think that's fine. I agree with that. Most of it goes to the education. The other part is the stipend. And then you said there was an issue of timing that we needed to address.
Well, I think the third thing I noted is that the bill itself says one-time stipend. It doesn't say when. Feels to me like that's payment, one time. I'm not sure.
Right.
The commission has language which says the stipend is paid during the term of the student member. So I don't know if that makes a difference to the council, but if, I'm just noting that difference in language, and if it means anything to you, there could
To
be.
suggest that
There could be
maybe
a
the
clarifying
offers-
amendment if you
Sure.
want it to be one or the other.
I don't-
If you think a one-time payment should be made, for example, at the end, or three-time payment, or that's
Got
all.
it.
That's what I'm saying.
Got
It's
it.
unclear to me.
Okay, so I would like to suggest and move that we support on the compensation side, the bill 725, which lays it out. I'd be open to saying to the sponsors that we would prefer that the stipend be paid out over time, over the course of to build responsible fiscal management in there. I see Mr. Tibbetts raising his hand, Madam President.
Mr. Tibbetts, come on down.
Dale Tibbetts, Special Assistant to County Executive Mark Elrich and staff to the Board of Education Compensation Commission. Just wanted to make one point that I'm sure the Commission would like you to have heard. In discussing whether to receive a scholarship or a stipend or both, the Commission was particularly concerned about that if it was a scholarship, then it kind of cuts out anybody who wasn't college bound as a potential candidate for running for the SMOB. So that was a point that was of particular importance to them. So before you made your motion,
Sure.
I would have that opportunity to consider it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I was going to raise a similar point, but I'm glad you did. In that was the third discrepancy you pointed out was the choice, like whether you wanted it to go towards, starting a business or, who knows what you wanted it to go towards. As the bill is drafted, it would be the 99,000. I'm talking about once it was fully implemented, would go towards a scholarship. And does that specify towards an institution of higher education
It
only?
does.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Right. So I would also be interested in seeing if you could give them that choice to put it towards something else. I think most of the SMOBs, I think probably all the SMOBs have gone to it for you, but we don't want to assume that that's going to happen going forward. So I appreciate Mr. Tibbetts bringing that up. So the way that the commission laid it out is you get the $45,000 stipend or the scholarship.
You can choose.
You can choose-
The
you
way
can
the
choose
language.
between it.
You can speak to this, Dale, but the language in the report just saying you can choose that amount as a scholarship or stipend. What's interesting is I didn't see in either the bill or that they can choose whatever amount they want in scholarship versus stipend, but it was one or the other for the commission.
Did they?
The Commission did not
talk about
address whether to split the amount, that you could do a portion as scholarship, the Commission did not discuss it.
So I would suggest keeping the bill amount so there's equity in the amount, and then if you wanted to do the choice, I'd be open to that. And then also paying it out over time. If you choose all stipend versus scholarship, it should be paid out over time. Would be my recommendation, at least as a starting bid.
Can I just clarify one thing, because we had this come up last time, the and versus the or, because I think in the bill, you get both the scholarship and a stipend.
Right, equal to
Correct.
the total amount.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. In the commission, it said or.
Or.
Yeah.
And you want your amendment?
I'm saying the full amount that the adult members receive, broken down into the same way the bill does it, but I'm adding Dale's point that was important to the commission. If a student isn't going to college, or maybe say they have a great business idea that they want to invest and put it into a business, they should be able to take that money and do that. They want to buy a home, whatever thing they want to do.
So it should be an or.
It should be, yeah.
So the overall amount stays
Yeah.
the same, but it's an or in how they use it?
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
All right, so that's an amendment. Yeah, I have Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. Appreciate this conversation. Let me just say from the onset, I don't, about how we have this conversation. There are a lot of different details and moving parts. My personal preference is not to take votes on any particular amendment or position, but to convey to the delegation the depth of the conversation and basically present a theory, a set of options that various council members have, because I appreciate Councilmember Jawando sharing and working through that. I have a different take, and my opinion is that the SMOB participation, first and foremost, they are a student. They are a student first and foremost, and we want them to get the best education that MCPS affords. In addition to being a full-time student, they are the student member of the Board of Education, devoting a lot of time with colleagues and the superintendent and out in the community and in the schools. And I think the original intent of that position and of the compensation, scratch that, the financial attachment of that SMOB position should remain a scholarship, because as is noted, and I believe as would be verified, every SMOB has gone to a four-year institution or higher educational opportunity. But then I have a real concern that if it turned into a salary, and let's call it what that term would be, it distorts the entire position, and the campaigns that students would then run for a paid salaried position, when it has been for the last number of decades, been a scholarship. And hey, if I was a student in Montgomery County, I would have considered running for SMOB to help supplement my single mother working two job salaries. And it would not have necessarily been because I wanted to support the work of the body. It would have been because of the financial incentives. And I think that we should still provide those incentives, but they should remain in the form of a scholarship, not to distort the position or the intention of running. And so I would like to put that out there as we engage in this conversation, but I have a question for the team. Has there been any progress on this legislation since we last discussed it? Were our thoughts from a few weeks ago conveyed to the sponsors or to the delegation?
I have not conveyed any thoughts because I didn't have, in my mind, permission to convey any thoughts. But having said that, there have been no work sessions on the bill.
Thank you. So it's important to note that there's been no outward progress since we last talked about it, which is why I would still prefer as a body that they be presented with all of these options and thoughts, because there is no right or wrong here. It's just different strategies. And I think the entirety of the comments of the 11 council members and clearly the executive would help shape the best public policy. So I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I appreciate the long conversation. I think it's clear that there are a lot of questions on this legislation. It's certainly well intended. We appreciate it. I think the overarching objective, there is broad agreement that we want school board members to be paid a adequate level of compensation commensurate with the obligations and responsibilities that they have overseeing a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that is the single most indispensable resource that we have in our county and in our community, our public school system. But there are a lot of challenges here. There are constitutional issues with staggered terms. There's the dynamic of the student member and full-time versus being a student. There's a question of the scholarship. Most scholarships are not taxed, depending on how this is viewed. That's a big difference in terms of paying it in compensation and then using it for school to pay for tuition. You would get taxed for that because that's compensation for a job, and you would have less money to use for your pursuit of your education. So how this is structured and how this is done not only has an impact on what we're doing as a community and what we're hoping to do, from a governance standpoint, it also has an impact on the people who are going to receive it and who it's intending to benefit. So I agree that I don't think we're prepared here to go through and suggest amendments in one direction or not. I think we can give broad guidance that we agree with the general thought process here and the interest being demonstrated by the sponsors, that we generally have views if we want to share those, but ultimately I think that there are a lot of details and a lot of questions that have to be worked out, and I'm not sure we're in a position to go through item by item, line by line, and make specific recommendations on what should or shouldn't be included in the bill, what should or shouldn't be changed in the bill, because I think each change that is made then has a lot of ripple effects of the impact that it has on other items.
Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. So I agree in terms of the complexity of this bill, and it's interesting. It would be different if we were just making this discussion amongst ourselves and voting ourselves on this bill, but we're not. And this bill is going to evolve. This is a complicated bill, and it's going to evolve. And the people who are actually going to vote on it will spend a lot more time on the bill. So I think that I don't think that we should go bit by bit by bit. I do think, just two comments to pass along. One is this issue of how are we going to consider staggered terms. I think one of the issues with staggered terms is that we're going to require school board members this is their full-time job. Many of them already have full-time jobs, and so that adds to that complication of how do we transition the school board members into these full-time slots with significantly more pay. And I think that's it. I think just one comment about SMOB. Yes, the individual does this full-time. They do a great job. Pernille is my constituent, as is his family, and he does a great job. One of the differences is that the increased compensation for the school board school board members, non-SMOB, is that we're asking them to significantly increase the level of effort that they put into the position. We're not asking the same thing of the SMOB, and I think that is an important difference when we talk about compensation. I do agree with increased scholarship and stipend, but I would not agree with somebody getting this full-time pay commensurate with other school board members. Last thing is maybe look at accredited certification programs, not necessarily a 4-year academic institution. I think would be a good addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Madam President.
And I know when we last discussed this, I had asked questions about whether any other of the 24 school boards were considered full-time, and some salary information related to that. Inherent in this bill's presentation is that if the board were full-time, it would discharge its duties better, or that there would be some kind of different decision-making than what has been happening previously. And I'm not convinced that is accurate, or that we have evidence that that would be in fact the case. Aside from the complications that have already been raised about full-time versus not full-time for the SMOB, who is in fact a full-time student, the State Board of Education members discharge a significant duty, and they are not paid. And they have responsibility for oversight of all of the state's educational regulations, whatever laws are being passed at the state level that affect our students' education, the fiscal ramifications, and all of the state board appeals, which are vast. They are not paid. They are reimbursed like any other person who serves on a board at the state for transportation or something like that. You can get, your mileage reimbursed, but they're not compensated in that way. And so I still believe that this is not the right solution for the problems that we've all been, collectively grappling with. But I also wanted to make sure everybody understood that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you get paid more, you'll discharge your duty better, because there are, in fact, a great team of folks serving at the State Board of Education who discharge their duty with great fidelity without being paid a full-time salary, in fact, without being paid at all. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. Appreciate the conversation. I think in regards to the SMOB position, that the most important piece, I think, is to make sure that that there is compensation being offered to the student member of the board that's going to make that position be equitably open to the full scope of the students who attend MCPS, which means that a student does not decide, I can't run for SMOB because I have to work outside of my school hours, and thus I'm not able to do those duties. So I think that they need to receive whatever we want to call it, a salary. I think it can't be a stipend at the end of the year, because that's not going to help those students who need to work to pay their bills. It's not going to help them. There has to be pay comparable to what they would be able to receive outside of school hours that's being discharged, throughout the course of the year. I do agree that if that rate is much, much, much higher than what could be made working outside of school hours, now you have, to the point that Councilmember Glass was raising, now you've kind of introduced another wrinkle into the conversation. But I do think that a piece of it has to be that the student is able to get a salary that is equal to what they would, at least equal to, and somewhere around the range of what they'd be able to be making outside of school working a part-time job. I like the idea of submitting comments for the sponsors' consideration. And I think that this has been a useful conversation for them to look over. And I don't know that I feel ready to vote on what exactly I think the amendment should be today, although that piece I just mentioned I think is vitally important. But then the question remains, how much should the scholarship be? I do think that there should be a scholarship component. There's a reason that we started out this venture with the SMOB of having it be a scholarship. We are supporting their emergence from MCPS and out into the world to continue doing good things. They should have some choice in how that gets spent out. I agree with what Councilmember Balcom noted about one possible way that we could expand the range of places that they could spend it. Noting also that there's technical certification that they could be receiving through Montgomery College, but if there's ways to further lift the limits on how those scholarships should be could be spent out, I think that is a positive thing. And so I think that it makes sense for this to be a two-part compensation package for the SMOB. I think one of them is easier to figure out what an appropriate amount would be. The other one requires, I think, a little more consideration in terms of what the number should be, and that would be the scholarship side. I see this as a vitally important bill. As I have been talking to constituents throughout pretty much my entire term of office and prior to that, the desire to ensure that our Board of Education is able to do a sufficient job and put in the time necessary to provide oversight over our massive school system, one of the largest in the entire country, which we all have seen they are not currently able to do to the extent that we would like them to be able to. The Commission did a tremendous amount of work and put a lot of consideration into whether there should be full-time compensation offered, which validates what I've been hearing from my constituents on the ground as well. So I think that this is the year that we have to get this done, that we have to make clear that we are not just continuing to call on the Board of Education to do more and better oversight, that we see that, we're going to back that up financially. I think that is appropriate for the many reasons that the Commission laid out. So what I would like to see us do is to indicate our support for this bill in general, and also send on our comments on some of these particular issues that we are asking them to reevaluate. Thank you.
Great. We have a couple of other folks in the queue. The way we're moving is to not debate the details of this, understanding that that will be discussed as this moves through the appropriate process in Annapolis, but the general sense that people are expressing are support for the bill. I'll let with communication to the sponsors about some of the issues that we've raised here. I do have a couple of other members in the queue, but we do have 4 other bills we really wanted to try and get through, so I will turn it over to Councilmember Katz now.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I will try my best to be extremely quick. I agree that we should be giving guidance and not voting. I believe that this bill will change and have additional people to consider being on the Board of Education. And Madam President, you too had a full-time job and were not compensated. I always tell people, in my case, depending on how you spell fool, but I had a full-time job. But I also believe that this should not be just a scholarship. It is wrong to assume that only people who might run for the student member will be going on to an additional educational opportunity. And I also wonder what happens if they go to a school for a couple of years rather than what happens to that money? I mean, and I understand there's a tax situation. They're going to have to worry with that when they decide what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. But bottom line, I think you have the toughest job of all to convey what we're telling you, because but I do believe that this should be not just a scholarship and it should be just guidance. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Sale.
All right, thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleagues for the discussion. I agree with a majority of what has been said. I also support the possible combination of a stipend/scholarship, but given that, this hasn't even been assigned to a committee, there's no date, I'd want us to just continue to watch whatever discussions happen, and when this does finally get a date, then once we hear what the discussion, how that discussion unfolds. I don't see a positive outlook for this. But I do think it's important to have the combination of scholarship and stipend. Students are having to travel to a lot of different schools. They're traveling to the meetings, and so they have a lot of responsibilities. And a scholarship at the end just won't support the day-to-day responsibilities that are needed to carry out their duties. So I would, continue to hold and look forward to the continued discussion of this bill.
Thank you. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Very briefly, I would say simply 2 things. One, I do support the combination of a stipend and the scholarship, a reasonable stipend and a scholarship. I'm just going to leave it like that. And the other thing is, remember that when you place this on your resume, when you apply to college, this, just by being the school board member for the Board of Education, will open doors to get lots of scholarship money. Okay, let's not forget that. And that's it. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Council Vice President Joando.
So yes, given all that, I'd like to modify my motion that we generally support the bill, in that you would provide the sponsors with the feedback that you've heard from various colleagues. I know not every colleague supports the bill, but so if we need to take a vote, I understand that. But I would say that I would move that we generally support the bill and then provide the sponsors with the comments that were a summary of the comments that were made by colleagues.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Sales, second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is 10. Opposed? That is 1. 10-1. All right. Bill number 1 down. The next one we had is regarding WSSC. I'll turn it over.
Okay.
Kathleen, you're up again.
Yep. Thank you. So yes, this is MCPG 10125, and we've discussed it before, but what we have in front of us now is an amendment that has been adopted by the full delegation. So as the bill came in, it's an exemption to the open meetings requirement for WSSC and the Planning Board. If you'd like, I can go over what it looked like when it came in. But as amended by the delegation, it's limited to meetings that are project site visits or educational field tours if no organizational business is conducted.
Great. Any conversation or anyone who'd like us to take a position on this?
Support.
All right. So Councilmember Sales makes a motion to support the bill. I have a second by Councilmember Joando. All those in favor of the council supporting this bill, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Next one.
Okay, I think you have a strategic choice here, Madam President, because I can go through the bill, tell you what it is. I can also share with you that there have been 2 work sessions on it, and they're not yet working on it. The delegation's Economic Development Committee is considering a number of issues and potential amendments. Well, I guess I should clarify. They have asked for the council's position on the issues that they are discussing, on the bill and the issues. So I suppose I should be really clear about what the bill does and the amendments. Okay. Okay. So just for frame of reference, WSSC, this has what's called a system development charge. If you've got a new building or a rehab building, you're expanding the number of toilets, number of faucets, they have what's called a system development charge to reflect this new capacity for the system they have to deal with. But state law allows the county council to create exemptions to that for a variety of nonprofits and also for some purposes like revitalization. Those purposes are listed in my packet, but also I think the most relevant document here is that every year during your budget process, your annual budget process, one of your resolutions at the end of the year is, here's what the system development charges are, and here's the exemptions that we're going to allow and the amounts of the exemptions. And a copy of that resolution is in your packet. Delegate Moon sees this bill as doing 3 key things. First of all, there's an annual report required by WSSC and the county departments at the end of the year about how this is working, number of applications, amounts of exemptions, etc. There is a requirement, partly in state law and partly in your council resolution, that says some of these nonprofits are not eligible unless they own the property. But what he's discovered is child care centers, for example, or other nonprofit might be leasing property. So he's overriding an ownership requirement. And then he's got language in there that says this program is a first come, first serve program. His intent was to clarify what is already true, that the program is first come, first serve. I mean, basically applications come in, they're evaluated, ones that come in after are not prioritized over the other, and the idea would be that they will be granted as long as there's money allocated to it. And just so you know, the county council's resolution sets a $500,000 cap for the amount of exemptions that may be granted each year, but also says that if any amount of unused money or allocation can go over to the next year. And right now, Montgomery County has over a $9 million surplus in the allocation in the System Development Charge Fund that can be used for exemptions. The committee is discussing amendments to strike the language about first come, first serve. There's just, I think some of the delegates had just because of what the heck does that mean? But after we talked about it, they now understand that from talking with Keith Levchenko, from talking to executive staff, it's a distinction without a difference for the folks who are running the program. So, but they're contemplating removing that language. They also wanted to make sure that there's no deadline for applying for an exemption. If you happen to be an entity that's eligible, but you didn't know about it when you paid the system development charge, you find out years later. They wanted to make sure there's no deadline. You can come back and apply. Again, that is how the program is run right now. It's happened, where if you didn't know about it at the time you paid the system development charge, you find out later, you apply, and the exemption can be granted as a refund. So again, it's how the program is run. If there's language that they want to put in, it appears that the intent would be to be consistent with how the program is already currently run. They're contemplating some kind of amendment to clarify what happens if the annual allocations run out. What I haven't shared with them, because I didn't know until Friday or so, is that we have a $9 million surplus in allocations. But they're contemplating sort of asking, possibly putting into the annual report, for example, clarification, to ask the county to say what's happening if you run out of an allocation in a given year. Again, they didn't know about the $9 million surplus at the time, but that's what they're considering. And they did ask for the council's position on the bill.
Thank you for that update. And I will say I was able to speak with the sponsor, and really, as you mentioned, the intent is to address this issue of particularly child care facilities that lease and aren't able to take advantage of this, and the fact that there's $9 million surplus, but I believe year to year we've had a $6 million rollover as well. And so there's just concern that the money is not being used for its intended purpose. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions on this. I do know we were requested to take a position if anyone feels like we're ready to do that today.
Support.
All right, Councilmember Sales moves to support. Do I have a second? Second. Councilmember Jawando, a second. Any other conversation? All those in support, all those in favor of supporting this bill at the moment, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Madam President, is that a support of the bill as written, with the idea if there's ever any specific amendment language, we would bring it back?
I think bring back yes, we would probably like to see.
Okay.
I'm looking at my colleagues. Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to say we're getting close to time, and if we could skip the next one, if everyone's okay with that, since we have the chair of the planning board here, that we move to item MCPG 116-25, since I think we can hold on MCPG 112-25, correct? Is that all right?
It has, you can. It has not been, it's actually, I believe, up to be heard in Metro Washington tonight. But let me just confirm that. No, it is not. It's the other WSSC bill.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
it's not scheduled for a work session.
Okay, so let's go to MCPG 116-25.
Okay, and yes, our planning board chair is here, and I'll just note, because he is the right guy for you to talk to, I just want to note that in the packet, there is a mistake. In the packet at the beginning, I referenced that I list 11 municipalities over which the county has planning authority right now, to which this bill applies. And I left out Village of North Chevy Chase, just want you to know that. And Village of North Chevy Chase is one of the 11 municipalities of the 12 that have expressly supported the bill. Madam President, would you like the planning board just to speak directly to the meaning of the bill and discussion of amendments, or would you like me to summarize
I can
it
turn
first?
to Chair Harris if you want to do it super
Well,
quickly.
I like Kathleen to discuss
Summary real quick?
summary
Okay.
of where and then we'll tell you where we are on this.
Great.
Okay. So even though these 12 municipalities don't have zoning authority, they do have some authority over regulating building structures. And in current law, it's written somewhat vaguely right now. It's requirements relating to specific issues, and it's listed in the packet. Signs, fences, walls, hedges, setbacks, it's listed there in the packet. The language in current law gives them that authority for single-family residences, and then says buildings without clarifying, without saying that it's single-family. That led to an AG's opinion a number of years ago, where the municipalities were saying, well, what does that mean? Do we have this authority when it comes to buildings that are not single-family? The AG's opinion is in your packet, and it essentially said to the municipalities, no, we think you have this authority with regard to all buildings in single-family zones. So that AG's packet is in there. This bill is being described by the municipalities who want it as a technical bill because they see it as codifying what the AG's office said in terms of what it means. The bill is written now to say that this authority that they have is regarding any type of residential house, building, or other structure on land zoned predominantly single-family residential use as of January 1, 2024. It does say that municipalities, when it comes to multifamily buildings, can be less strict, but not more strict than for single-family. And then it's my understanding from talking to the sponsor that Delegate Solomon has been involved in discussions with planning department staff and perhaps you directly, Mr. Harris. So in terms of, I think you might be the best person to speak to those amendments, but we don't have specific language in front of us right now.
Yeah. Welcome, Artie Harris, Chair of the Planning Board. Thank you for giving that summary. So the board has not taken up a position on this bill because there were some amendments that were added on Friday morning. And I talked to Delegate Solomon and said that our next meeting is Thursday, which is this Thursday, and we will take up this bill and provide our recommendations. So we've been in discussions. We've had good discussions. Director Sartori and I have had some good discussions with him, but this language came out on Friday, and I have to bring it up to the board, and we'll discuss it, and we'll provide recommendations then.
Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, I personally don't think we need to hold. I mean, I think that the amendments that are being suggested are to clarify, to make sure that the language actually accomplishes what the intent here. I would suggest that we support this. I'll just give a little bit of background here. I have worked with a number of the municipalities since they're overwhelmingly in my district. This has been ongoing for a couple years, actually. The interest in this, to clarify, predates the recommendations on attainable housing that came from the planning board, although it does relate to the question of whether or not other structures are allowed or permitted at any time in a municipality, and whether or not the municipality has the same rights and the same responsibilities under state law to regulate stormwater, setbacks, and other reasonable standards. The view is, as long as there is at minimum parity between a single-family unit and another building structure, which has been the overwhelming nature of the conversation as any changes might be made now or in the future, that the municipality should retain those rights. That was, something that was provided to them, and it was never the intent that they could only regulate in some way one type of structure, but not have the same standard for another type of structure. So the amendments that have been discussed is really language of whether or not you specify exactly what these structures would be, listing them out or not, whether or not you include buildings and structures or just say structures. I mean, these are very technical amendments that have been put forward. I personally don't think it is necessary to hold off on that, and I will say and appreciate the work and the leadership of Delegate Solomon and others and his team. The less strict language was intentional language that the municipalities put forward to demonstrate that the intent here is not to weigh into what is permitted or not permitted. It's to say if there are changes that are made, that municipalities retain the same rights, the same responsibilities, and the same legal authority that they currently have under state law, and that the Attorney General's opinion, as we heard earlier from staff, is codified, since that has been said, but it is not clearly and explicitly stated in state law. So I'd move support of the bill. I would allow for the Planning Board to weigh in on the amendments, which are technical in nature, but ultimately I don't think that these amendments change in any way the substance and the intent of the bill. So I'd move support.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second by Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, Councilmember Sales.
Thank you. Do we have a fiscal note on this bill?
No.
Okay, I'm just thinking of the meters, because some housing that we have, whether it's a condo or a townhouse, I don't know how, if we have to change, WSSC is going to have to put new meters on homes to be able to directly assess how much consumption is being used by a particular unit, as opposed to what they're doing now. So I don't know what infrastructure improvements they have to make, or properties will have to make to comply with this new.
Yeah, I think you're referencing the bill that the council president put aside for a moment, kind of skipped over that. It's a WSSC bill.
Okay.
It's a good question about the fiscal impact, and
Oh, good.
WSSC should speak to that, but we skipped over that bill.
It's a great question, and you know what? We'll start with that next time. But on regarding the bill we have before us, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And it's 10. Any opposed? Wait. The 10 favor. Who's opposed?
No, I was a favor.
You're a favor. Okay. It is unanimous. Sorry. A delay unanimous vote. And Chair Harris.
Madam President, this is to Councilmember Friesen. It was also good to understand the history, because there was what the board did not want to do was prevent anything from allowing these other housing typologies going forward. So I appreciate your description of the history of why this came about. So thank you.
Yes, and I just want to add, having been a mayor involved in these conversations when they started a number of years ago, I very, very much appreciate Delegate Solomon and all the work he's done, the work that Councilmember Friesen has done to get us to this place. And so we look forward to the continued work of the Planning Board to figure out the fine details of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Madam
you.
President, just to
Yes.
clarify, is this like the prior bill? This is a support, and when there are final amendments, for example, that are approved by planning board, bring them back?
Yeah, we
Is
should.
that-
Yeah, that would be
Okay,
just
but
helpful
it's
for us to-
support as written for the
Yes.
bill? Okay.
Yeah.
But there are new things out there, but yes.
Yeah, but we're not feeling the need to get into the details of that, is the sense of the body here. So,
Okay.
But we would like to be informed
Okay.
of how things develop throughout. And that's why we have this great chart that I very much appreciate all of you updating, and we can just put the updates in that. And that, right, we do not have to take another vote. Yeah.
We support the bill.
We support the, yeah, the changes are moving forward. It's an FYI, moving forward. All right, with that, we are adjourned. My apologies to the committees that are meeting in 10 minutes.